Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your guide and host, Courtney Anderson. As always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information, give show feedback, show suggestions, any ideas that you may want to reach out and communicate about. Let me know. So here today we have one of our Management Magicians series shows. And of course, our Management Magicians series is all about those of us who honor, appreciate, admire, study, work with, educate those volunteers who step up to be managers. Now, managers, of course, ideally are the embodiment of both leaders, people who have the bigger picture vision of an organization or an entity, and they also have additional specific actionable directives that they're responsible for. So our most senior leaders are focused on, if you're going to look at a scale, more leadership vision activities and tasks than they are the day-to-day assessment and oversight of individual staff. As we move down an organizational structure, when we're looking at a traditional sort of pyramid-shaped organization, then we start to change the balance where as we move down to maybe an entry-level supervisor or manager, we're looking at someone who has the majority of their time and resources are spent on the specific day-to-day issues of the individuals that they supervise and manage and ensuring that those discrete tasks are accomplished at the highest level of outcome, and their vision, long-term goal, big picture focus is lesser of a percentage of their daily tasks. And so our managers are, no matter where they are in the hierarchy of an organization, going to have some percentage of the big picture leadership vision and also their day-to-day oversight and assessment of their team members and staff. So as we are discussing our Management Magicians, we always want to keep that in mind because you're not going to be in a situation where your manager has zero leadership. You're not going to be in a situation where a leader has zero management. They're just going to have a different allocation of the percentage of their time and resources that are put into those different areas. But as a Management Magician, those are our individual, again, volunteer managers who are at such an elite level of performance, of outcomes, that it seems like it's magic. It really does. It really does. And when I was, first working through developing the series, I kept thinking, well, is magic a little bit too much? Is it hyperbole at a level that's beyond being something that's credible? But I've had the on-the-ground experience of going to literally hundreds of organizations around the world for the past 15, 16 years, doing corporate education, training, consulting, sometimes on-site legal advice for clients, that I've seen such a variety that there really is something almost magical when you go to an organization with exceptional leadership throughout the entire culture, because you do tend to see so few of the challenges with hiring, retention, behavioral issues, progressive discipline, and it does almost seem magical. I think that again, I've done this analogy in many different settings and programs, but it's somewhat like someone who came maybe from we talk about management and leadership in organizations in our personal life, which is often our family structure or, social groups, things of that nature. But when we look at a family, historically we'll have the adults, of course, who are responsible, and then we will typically have minor children who are part of the organization that the managers and leaders are responsible for making decisions for. And when you go to an organization that is poorly managed, that's outside of a professional setting, so a family, let's say, And in my variety of experience, I've also certainly, as an attorney, I've done family law cases, and I've done cases where there's abuse, and children are actually removed from their family and placed in a foster care. So I've seen a whole variety of situations, and when you work with someone who comes from an environment that's a very poorly managed family, they tend to think, well, this must be, kind of typical. They may think, maybe it's a little bit extreme, if someone's making very serious assertions of abuse or neglect, but they'll think, oh, well, most families, might be a little bit nicer, but I think they're probably the same, right? And they really don't fully grasp how different their organization is functioning or dysfunction. And they do tend to think like, oh, this is kind of normal, but it really isn't. And when you take someone who's from a family that's, we'll just say, poorly managed and with poor leadership, and they go and see what somebody, what the life is like, the experience, the culture of a family that's exceptionally well managed with leadership, and we don't have neglect, we don't have abuse, we don't have steps that the managers are taking to diminish and degrade or be condescending to their minor family members. It really does seem magical. It almost seems like a movie, right? And I've actually had people say that to me, like, this doesn't seem real. It's just so, out of, something Hollywood would create. But the reality is, no, it's not magic. It's just that that's what happens when you have people who are very healthy emotionally, making good choices, thinking through them, have their own personal needs met, so they're not trying to meet their needs vicariously through these other family members. They are someone who's lived a life of very little regret, so they're not in a situation where they're sort of seething in anger or disappointment about what their life is, but they make choices to want to lead and to manage those families. They desired that, and then they put a lot of work into ensuring that they've got systems that are set up, whether it's something, with homework or chores, shared responsibility, teaching people empowerment, ensuring that there's one-on-one time with every family member, and that people continue to feel special, and also understand that there are consequences to their actions. Those families exist. They are real. And it's not magic. It just seems like magic to someone who comes from another environment and really is very, skeptical of, I just don't believe it's possible. And I have very similar feedback working with organizations, with, for-profit, non-profit, government entity, private sector, it doesn't matter. Small startups, solo entrepreneurs to, the largest employers in the world. I have some clients I've done corporate education programs for that literally have, over 2 million employees. These are huge organizations, global. So it doesn't matter, size, age, any of that, location. What tends to happen, though, is I get that same sort of cynicism where people say, look, what are you selling or peddling? What kind of fantasy is this, that people come and enjoy their work and do their best and overall get along with people and communicate transparently, and there's trust, people working together towards shared goals. In addition to that, we have higher than peer group performance or outcomes or goals. It's not, again, magic. What it is a commitment from the very top of the organization in terms of leadership and vision all the way through every single entity, where they understand what the expectations are, they understand what the benefits are, they understand what the shared negative consequence and what the individual negative consequence would be if they make different choices. They are treated with respect at all times. People feel valued. This is, again, just like that family that functions like that. It's not an act. It's real. It's designed, though. Systems are set up. Managers and leaders build into their system room for if someone's having an issue personally and needs some time to either reflect or maybe be away from the office or change their duties slightly, so that they're able to be flexible enough to accommodate people, so that people feel that they are investing in the organization. The organization is investing in them. So again, it's incredibly similar. All that's to say that our topic today has applications, of course, inside our professional life and outside. And our topic, of course, is critical thinking staff or obedient staff. Pick only one. critical thinking staff or obedient staff? Pick only one. The first part of the show notes ask the question, who cares? Which I think is a great question, right? Like, seriously, who cares? And when I ask that question, I mean, who cares about the topic? The topic is critical thinking staff on one hand, one option, or obedient staff on the other hand. Pick only one. That's the topic. And the question of who cares is incredibly important, because if I don't care, obviously I hopefully probably wouldn't be at this part in the program. But even if you're at this point, you're still wondering, okay, well, fine, get to the meat. What's the point? Well, the point is that there are many different sources that argue that critical thinking is a very important job skill, or is the most important job skill in the current global business market. And I gave one example there in the show notes. I just gave a Forbes reference to critical thinking being the number one skill that's found in 9 out of the 10 most in-demand jobs, and I provided a link. Now, there are different sources you'll find that will find, some sources will say it's lower down the list than number 1. Some sources will say, well, it's in the top 10. But there are very few sources credible sources that are going to make the assertion that critical thinking is irrelevant. And no, it doesn't matter at all, and it's just some goofy thing people made up. So that's part of it. So whether it's number 1 or number 10 or just in the top quartile, the idea is that critical thinking might be something that you might care about if you're in business. And if you're a manager, we're talking to our management magicians, we're honoring our management magicians. Obviously, this is geared toward people who have those interests. What is it? Now, this, of course, is fraught with all kind of debate. So there's a definition I just grabbed out of a dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, in the show notes, and it says critical thinking, the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. On the other hand, I define obedience, because that's our choice, right? The show topic posits I can choose critical thinking or I can choose obedient. Which of those am I going to do in terms of my staff? Obedience, again, from the same Oxford Dictionary, compliance with an order, request, or law, or submission to another's authority. All right, sounds awesome. People might still think, what's the problem? I'm not getting it. I'm not seeing an issue. I don't see that I need a solution because I'm not really seeing a problem. So this was very challenging to try to distill a ton of information into as concise as an argument as possible. So here we go. The problem is, and what the show topic argues, is that you can't have both. I can't have critical thinking staff at the same time have my obedient staff and have those sort of as equal partners. The argument is I'm going to have to pick one. And that may be that I actually am going to just pick one, or it might be that I pick one as the priority. The content in the show notes is trying to establish my argument that the reason why I have to pick one is because they're opposed. They're almost diametrically opposed. What is? Critical thinking and obedience. These are two totally different skills, and there are two totally different behaviors, and there are two totally different types of individuals who demonstrate behavior in accordance with either of these options. And being aware of that is imperative if we're going to determine that we want critical thinkers. Okay. Part of the problem is, allegedly, there are very few critical thinkers. So there's a source in the show notes from a paper that asserts, it says, critical thinking means business. Learn to apply and develop the new #1 workplace skill. This is actually from Pearson, which is a huge organization in the education space. So they have this product, this research they put forward, and it's got the information there so you can go to the source and read it. But part of it says that, so its argument is that the #1 workplace skill is critical thinking, right? That's what this whole piece is. And part of their content says that they have a survey of HR professionals, and they found that a full 70% of employees with high school education were deficient in critical thinking. Even among employees with 4-year college education, 9% were deficient, and only 28% were rated excellent critical thinkers. That piece actually, if you go read the original, goes on to say that there are also challenges in the higher levels of leadership at organizations, because you have to have strategic vision to be able to lead organizations, and that's a problem in terms of having sufficient numbers of team members that possess those skills, and those very high-level skills to see what doesn't exist. That's what vision's about, and then, of course, to be able to plan for the future, which is incredibly challenging for people who have deficient critical thinking skills. And the other source in the show notes is from the United States military. It's from the United States Army Management Staff College, and it's a piece that is entitled Developing Thinking Skills, Critical Thinking at the Army Management Staff College. And it starts off with an abstract, and it has its own definition of critical thinking. It says, critical thinking is the ability to be in control of one's thinking. It includes the ability to consciously examine the elements of one's reasoning or that of another and evaluate that reasoning against universal intellectual standards: clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, breadth, and logic. It also involves the structured examination of sources of information. I love the first part of that. Critical thinking is the ability to be in control of one's thinking. Wow. It sounds almost magical itself, right? I'm in control of my own thoughts. And then it to me leads to the question of, well, what's the absence of critical thinking? I'm not in control of my thinking. Someone else is? Am I brainwashed? Am I a robot? Am I a zombie? I want to know, right? Like, that's intriguing. That's an exciting issue itself. And there are other programs where I'll go more into depth and sort of that area of inquiry. Our challenge for our management magicians is this: I got to get stuff done, right? So whether I'm an entry-level manager and I spend the majority of my time on just the day-to-day resources and staff and getting my discrete tasks done, or I'm a more senior manager and I have more of a balance with my larger strategic vision, I'm still responsible for getting stuff done. And I'm getting stuff done through people, because I need people. I may need very few people. Maybe I have technology, maybe I have robotics, but I need people. So, what are the people able to do? The idea with this critical thinking idea is that they're able to control their own thinking, obviously, and that they're able to have objective analysis and evaluation to form a judgment. So it's the same idea, just repeated lots of different ways, that the critical thinking person is able to control and think through, what does this mean? Is this a lie? Is it true? Who's telling me this? Is it an advertisement? Is it a credible source? Should I believe it? Is it a viable threat? Is it just somebody trying to encourage me to waste money on their product or service? All of this is critical thinking. Again, I'm controlling my own thinking. And I'm being able to make, as much as I can, logical and objective analysis and evaluation. Who's telling me this? Where am I getting the data from? What was the motive of the entity that created the data? How old is it? How recent is it? How applicable is it to my fact pattern? These are the people who decide things. And the absence of critical thinking, or they're not controlling their own thinking, that they're just regurgitating other people's thoughts, means that those people aren't able to make decisions because they don't decide. All they do is obey. Now, you certainly need people who obey in any organization. The challenge is, as per the show notes from this Army Management Staff College, it's in the show notes, and it says this. Here's the crux of the challenge. Well, part of the challenge is we don't have majority numbers of people that have these critical thinking skills. So that's one part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge is this: critical thinking can't just be switched on. It may be asking too much of people who have been nurtured and rewarded in an environment where, as one soldier turned civil servant put it, the lines are your friends. It's safe within the lines. Stay within the lines. To suddenly change their thinking habits, therefore, we have to provide students an environment where thinking skills can be learned and then practiced in realistic situations that are otherwise safe and supported. supportive. Okay. So trying to distill that down into really bottom line, what the Army material, the military material is arguing is that you have somebody who has been, as they call it, nurtured and rewarded, right? Where, as the person's quote says, the lines are your friends. It's safe within the lines. Stay within the lines. So you have somebody who's been brought up and nurtured and rewarded in a system where they follow the rule. That's what the stay within the lines is, right? It may be literally stay within the lines. I know when I was a young person in primary school, they would often have situations where they would draw lines on the floor, and you would stay within the line or you'd stay on the line, and literally there was a line on the floor, and that would tell you where to go and what to do, and it was a literal manifestation. Certainly, in many instances, when we talk about staying within the lines, what we're talking about is the idea of virtually staying in the lines. So, in other words, just follow the rules. What did they tell you to do? Then whatever that is, do that thing. That's what obedience is. And the argument is that if you've trained somebody, basically, and you've nurtured and rewarded them, you kept teaching them, stay within the lines. I'm telling you what to do what I tell you, and you get a reward. And you train them to be very obedient. They're good at that. That's what you've trained them to do. You can't go to that same person and just switch on and tell them to do the entire opposite of everything that they know. Their whole entire system is built on their safety and reward and me following orders. I'm obedient. I'm staying within the lines because it's safe. If I do that, then I'll be good. I'm doing the right thing. I'll be rewarded. You come to them and you tell them you want them to throw that entire system away and do the entire opposite. Don't stay within the line. Go out, in fact, this whole thing, right? Think outside the box. It's so toxic to people who aren't management magicians and don't really step back and look at their organization and understand. I can't tell somebody sometimes their entire personal life through their, primary school and secondary school, and maybe their family structure was very authoritarian where, okay, it's structured, but you must stay in the lines. You don't quote talk back, you don't challenge me. I told you what to do. My house, my rules. So somebody who went through that system at their personal home and in their educational system, which many educational systems are totally based on the same type idea, right? I told you, sit down. I'm the teacher. You can't talk back to me. You can't ask me why I made that decision. You can't deviate from what I told you to. Then you'll be punished. It's all about obedience over and over and over again, which is fine. I'm not right now on this show in tackling the question of whether or not that's the best method for managing outside of work or for education, primary and secondary education. I'm just saying that in many instances that's exactly what happens, and that's what there's a huge emphasis on. So people are taught to be obedient, and they're good at that. Then all of a sudden you want to put them in a work environment and start telling them, the number one thing that 9 out of 10 of the top jobs, I need you to do critical thinking. It's the number one thing I need. It's so important because the critical thinker is the visionary. My critical thinker is what's going to be, my competitive advantage in the market because it's going to allow me to innovate new products. My critical thinker is thinking outside the box. My critical thinker is the one that's doing all these awesome things, and I have a new service or a new product or something that's just going to get out there and really build my organization. You can't tell someone who's been trained, as the military source material says, they have been nurtured and rewarded. As the quote from that soldier turned civil servant says, the lines are your friends. It's safe within the lines. Stay within the lines. That's what they may have been taught from their earliest memory as a child, as a toddler, all the way up through, they're 30 years old. And that's all they understand because that's what they've been done. That's what their environment has done to them. That's how they've been treated in their environment. That's what's been done. Stay within the lines. And they do that very well. It's unfair. Certainly there's research that says it's unhealthy and it's unrealistic, of course, which is the main problem. You can't do it. This argument that you can't switch critical thinking on, I totally, completely concur with that assertion. You can't, because the people that you're trying to go and say to them, go be critical thinkers, it's obvious that they're deficient. If they weren't deficient in critical thinking, you wouldn't have the discussion with them, correct? So they're quote lacking in this, right? And often because of exactly what the military sources describe. They have these really high and very well developed obedience skills, which are awesome. That's what they've been trained to do. Then you go to them and you tell them, oh my goodness, what I need to be competitive in a global market, even as a government agency, of the vision and dealing with the demographic changes in my organization and the culture and technology and everything, I have got to be able to innovate. I must be, speed kills. I need all of this creative and outside the lines, outside the box thinking, but you go tell that to people whose entire existence has been based on obedience. And they can't just throw away everything they know. And in fact, this idea, if you accept the definition that the abstract provides from the military, right? The critical thinking is control of your own thoughts. You have people who don't have that. They're obedient. Obedience means I'm not in control of my thoughts. It means I'm obeying your thought. I submit to your authority. I just comply with what you tell me to. So I don't think it. I just follow it. But that means that I need somebody to follow. The challenge is, and I think the cruelty, and I think what obviously results in very, very poor management and leadership and often the destruction of organizations, is somebody who doesn't see this. You don't have both. You have one or the other. The person who didn't excel in being obedient, who didn't stand on the line in primary school, who asked authority figures, why are we doing this? Is there a better way to do it? I have a suggestion. Why don't we try this? That person is punished, right? The source material in the show notes says, look, the person who is very obedient was nurtured and rewarded for staying in the lines. That's why the person says it's safe in the lines, that we're taught that. You have a few people who, in those environments, don't obey. They don't stay within the lines. Obviously, it's not safe when you're not inside the lines. That's why they were trained to stay in the lines. The people who don't stay in the lines are constantly discipline problems, right? They're in detention. They're in punishment. They're sent to their rooms. They, quote, talk back. They have a big mouth, quote, unquote. I mean, these are the people who are doing exactly what creative thinking says. They're in control of their own thoughts. They're not submitting blindly to authority, right? They're refusing to comply with an order unless they understand it or they have their questions answered or they feel there might be a better way to do it. They're punished, right? They're not getting all that nurturing, rewarding, which teaches people to be obedient. They're getting the opposite. They're getting punishment. And many people continue, though, to be disobedient. Sometimes they're put into educational systems. There are some educational systems and educational programs. I went through some in my education in public school where they'll take some children, I think that's based, I don't think, but I know based on tests and other materials, and put them in these programs and say to them, okay, now you can go be creative. There are no lines. Create your own assignments. Do whatever you want to. And when I was growing up, this was in different parts of the world, but they would call them different programs, like gifted and talented programs, things like that. And those children, at least my experience being in those programs, you were told there are no lines. Create your own assignment. You were encouraged to challenge your teacher and have your own arguments and be able to support them. But these are little, small, tiny programs in terms of population. They were rare. So not many people go through those. Most people go through the program where you're taught the opposite, to follow the line. Stay in the line. Don't question authority. So it makes logical sense then, if you train people, the majority of people, to go follow the line, then when I see the source that I referred earlier, and it says, 70% of people with high school education are deficient in critical thinking. Are they? Or are they just really, really super awesome proficient in obedience? You could just label it differently. And that's my point, and that's what the purpose of the show is. Somebody is really super awesome at obedience, which makes sense if you've gone through sort of a traditional public education and you weren't in one of these, sort of separate programs for very small amounts of kids. You were taught to stay in the lines, and you did that. Like the quote from the source in the show notes says, it's safe in the lines. So people do that, and then you turn around and label it a negative and say that they're deficient in their critical thinking. No, they're not. They're just really proficient in their obedience, which is what they've been trained to do. Why don't you just look at it for what this is, the outcome that the system, whoever the system, big picture, that's what they wanted and that's what they got. I think it's disingenuous, and again, it's cruel to say, they're so deficient in this. Well, why on earth would they ever? They've never learned this. They've learned a totally different system, and they do really well at it. And then you want to chastise and punish them in terms of pay and job opportunity, and say, well, you don't have these critical thinking skills I need. Well, yeah, of course I don't, because I was taught not to do that. I was taught to stay in the line. It's dangerous to go outside the line. And now you want to turn to somebody later in life and tell them, I want you to go outside the line, think outside the box, go be innovative and creative. It doesn't make any logical sense at all. There's another point that's in the source that I have in the show notes there that's talking about staying within the lines. When you go to the link, which I provided for you, this is really, really powerful. Okay, so I'm reading again from the source, and I provide you the link. So right above the summary and conclusion, it says, if there's one negative aspect to all of this, they're talking about the critical thinking program, it is that it is much harder to get students to build new taxonomies and to think for themselves than it is to give them an answer to regurgitate. Again, this is my interjection. That makes total sense, right? People who are obedient, that's what they do, is regurgitate, because you told them. They wait for the order to obey, and then they comply with it. That's what their job is. That's what they're really good at. That's what they've been trained and nurtured and rewarded to do. When you ask them to build new ways of thinking outside of something that they're told to do, then of course it's incredibly difficult. And it also shatters their entire system of behavior. Okay, back to the quote. It says it's even harder to evaluate whether, this is somebody you're trying to teach critical thinking, whether they are thinking critically and consequentially than it is to have them spit back an answer to a straightforward knowledge-based question, right? That makes sense. If I tell somebody 1 and 1 is 2, and they repeat back 1 and 1 is 2, excellent. They get a check plus, an A. They regurgitated what I told them to. If I ask them to go out and explain to me why 1 and 1 is 2, that's a much different question. If I ask them to go out and challenge me that 1 and 1 isn't always 2, that's an incredibly different question. Back to this original source, and this is to me so powerful. It says a further difficulty is that when we are done, so this is we teaching the person critical thinking, and these are all adults in the military, we return the student to a place where everyone else is thinking the same way they were before the student left. Now that's powerful. What that's saying is you have people who may, again, their whole entire education life, their whole entire personal life may have been, I stay within the lines, it's safe in the lines, and they're excellent at being obedient. If you go and decide you want to come up with this brilliant plan that because you need more people to be critical thinkers, because you realize I need without people to give orders to the obedient people, then my whole system breaks down, because the obedient people aren't able to come up with their own ideas, remember, because the definition is that they don't control their own thinking. The problem is you go take a few people because you think as an organization I need more critical thinkers, which is obvious, you do at some point. And you go and you try to change everything about the way they see the world, right? So you stop them from just sitting around submitting to authority. You stop them from following the line. You get them into some place where you really teach them, and this is a very difficult and painful and stressful and sometimes even unhealthy process, to question everything, right? You do this, and then I love, again, as I just read, is that you return the person to a place where everyone else is thinking the same way they were before the student left. So you take the person out of their environment where they stay within the lines and they're safe. You disrupt everything about their vision of the world, of themselves, with this insistence that you're going to try to teach them critical thinking. You do this, and then you turn right around and put them back in the environment where everybody is nurtured and rewarded for staying in the lines. What was the point of it? And talk about the psychological and emotional damage that does to someone. I really am, emotionally, it's very tough just thinking about how cruel this is and inappropriate. So the argument of the show was you need to pick one. Obedient staff are obviously, there are just more numbers of them. And it depends on what part of the world you're in, depends on what type of industry you're in, all that type of issue. But you're going to find higher numbers of people with excellent, proficient obedience skills, because that's what the majority of our societies and our systems train people to do, is follow orders and don't question authority. Don't think for yourself. So that's what they're well skilled and able to do. So part of it is asking managers and organizations is, do we need to do more to create more space and more opportunity for people who are really proficient and obedient? Because if that's what the resources have gone into creating, are these people who 70% of whom I'm going to argue are very proficient at obedience, right? The high school graduate. That's great. We train them to do that. We collectively as societies. So then we need to have a place for them to go do that, what they know how to do and feel safe within the lines. it is also totally reasonable that those sort of few outliers, the people who were disobedient, who talked back, now they're adults and people really want them because they're critical thinkers. So the challenge, of course, there are smaller numbers of them, and depending on, with some few specialized situations, those people went through a lot of negative consequence for these exact skills that now are so greatly prized, which is many times why you'll see in high tech and a lot of innovative organizations, the person just sort of either goes out on their own, they certainly do things outside the traditional convention, partially because they've come up with these habits where they've been punished all along, being themselves. So my argument is either go out and find the people that already pre-exist as critical thinkers, which is what everyone is trying to do. There's a lot of other research I had putting together the show that's just awesome, trying to sort of show the global talent rush, right, to try to find these critical thinkers. The challenge, of course, is there are small numbers of them. So it might be that in the future, societies, cultures, organizations may want to reevaluate these institutional histories where all the people, the majority of people are trained to be obedient. We may want to reevaluate that collectively, we as humans on the planet in different parts of the world, and start training people to not do that, and on a larger scale. And that would, of course, then give more balance in potential employees. But that would be down the road, because you have to start with people, babies born today, and change a lot of society. So certainly what will continue to happen with people who are not management magicians is they'll get just convinced that they can, quote, train someone, just flips that switch. And all of a sudden, my super obedient, wonderful team member who's excellent and feeling safe and good about themselves is thrown into this turmoil where I'm literally destroying, their worldview and their behavior and everything that makes them feel comfortable. And that's why I implore you, I beg you, pick one. Pick one. And the same way we spend all the time in this episode talking about you can't flip the switch and make the obedient person into the critical thinker, you can't flip the switch the other way either. So those people who've come up and still have or have developed or whatever, they have the critical thinking, they absolutely are going to be not something you can flip a switch and make them obedient. That's the challenge, right? That's why if you could, then they never would have been an outlier. So this is it's an emotional, it's a powerful, and of course it's a very pragmatic business issue. We must be realistic as managers. So what are we going to do? Being aware of the situation and making a commitment to people. So for people who are very proficient and excel, again, at obedience, let's respect that and make sure we create the best opportunities for them. For people who, for whatever reason, are actual critical thinkers, we have to understand then they're not going to be obedient. They're not going to just follow my orders. That's the whole point. If they were, then they wouldn't be critical thinkers. You can't complain and say how difficult they are to work with. Well, they're creative and individual thinkers. They control their own thoughts. You can't control them. That's the whole point. That's what you claim you want. So then you can't sit around and complain about how difficult they are. This is a very intense issue. Again, it was a pleasure for me to have you as part of it today. I hope that you come to CourtneyAnderson.com, share any feedback, and also take part in all the other programs and resources that we provide in these areas. But really, as a manager magician, think long and hard and understand what you're dealing with, and try to find ways to honor and value people as they are in the systems that they know, and maximize their success and minimize these destructive and negative after effects. Pick one. Pick one. Thank you.